Hi, everybody. Today is Tuesday, January 7th, and our friend Scott Ritter is back with us. Welcome back, Scott.
Thanks for having me.
Let's get Scott. Let's get started with the new rhetoric and Zelensky, CNN. They're talking about the North Korean battalion being involved in Russia, we can say in Ukraine, on the battleground fighting Ukrainians. Here is what CNN reported.
Ukrainian President Zelensky says the Russian army lost up to a battalion of North Korean soldiers who've now joined Moscow's fight and some Russian paratroopers. If that's in fact accurate, how impactful is that sort of defeat?
Well, it could be up to 1,000 soldiers that would be lost in a situation like that. Normal battalion size in the Russian military is somewhere between 600 and 800 soldiers, depending on the type of battalion. So let's cut it in half and say about 500 were lost. That's still somewhat significant in a specific operation. Now, it's not going to change the course of the war by itself. It's also not going to change exactly what the Russian goals are, but it could have a momentum of its own. And actions like this, if the Russians were in fact, and the North Koreans were in fact in a situation where they lost that many people, that could have a significant impact on their ability to carry forth operations in the Kursk area.
Actually, here is Zelensky, Scott. I don't know if you watched the interview he had with Lex Fridman. I don't remember his name, the interviewer, but he was talking about North Korean being involved in the conflict in Ukraine. Here is what he said.
North Korea, just look at this example. 12,000 has arrived. Today, 3,800 killed or wounded. They can bring more, 30, 40,000, or maybe 500. They can bring many people. Why? Because they have order, autocracy, and everything. Can Europe bring people together? No. Will Europe be able to build an army consisting of 2 to 3 million people? No, Europe will not want to do this. And for what? We definitely don't want a world war with you. There is no such purpose. There is no such purpose as gathering everyone. We do not want any war. We want to stop the Russians. And they invite North Korean soldiers. Invited. Their faces are burned. They themselves burn their faces. Those who cannot escape, injured or killed. There's a video. Everything I'm telling you, there is evidence of this. So that they are not recognizable, right? It means, what does it mean? It's out of values which
What evidence is he talking about, Scott? Do we have any sort of evidence?
I haven't seen any. I mean, maybe he, as the president of Ukraine, has seen evidence. If he has, he needs to present it. The dogs, they were quiet all morning. Now, who knows what's going on? The wind is blowing. Look, are there North Koreans on Russian soil engaging the Ukrainians? I think there's enough circumstantial evidence to suggest that this is indeed the case. Are they there because the Russians are desperate? No. In fact, even the Western media outlets and the U.S. intelligence acknowledge that this wasn't done at Russian request, that this is a request by North Korea so that it can get combat experience, get its troops, relevant combat experience, and bring it back so that their military will be better prepared for any, potential conflict with South Korea and the United States. The numbers, again, purely speculative because we don't know the scope and scale of this. There's evidence of North Korean artillery systems arriving in Russia, being deployed to the front. I would imagine that these systems would be manned by North Korean soldiers. You know, how they're being employed. Are they integrated into a Russian, fire support plan? Are they operating independently? Do they operate as direct support of North Korean infantry? We don't know these things. I would suggest, though, that the notion that there are casualties amounting to 3,800 is fantasy on the part of Zelensky and the Ukrainians. Again, no evidence of this has been brought to the table. I'm sorry for the dogs. I probably have to hit pause and go silence them. I don't know why they're barking, but they're moving to different parts of the house, which implies that a cat is on the move and the dogs are harassing the cat. It stopped, so the cat may have made its escape. It's as interesting as watching the front lines in Kursk. Who's doing what to whom? But no, the fact of the matter is, I just ask people sometimes you have to take a step back from when these numbers are put out there. 3,800 casualties. That's a whole lot of people. Imagine the violence it would take to achieve that. The amount of artillery that have to be brought to bear, and it has to be done in a way where the Ukrainians have achieved, dominance of the battlefield, because that implies that the Ukrainians are in total control of the battlefield. And normally, I mean, I guess this is taking place in the context of the Ukrainian offensive. Normally in an offensive, you want a 3-to-1 ratio because you're going to take casualties too. The attacking force generally takes more casualties than the defenders. And you're talking what now? That would be, say, 2-to-1. We'll just say the Ukrainians are having a good day. That's what, 7,600 Ukrainian casualties. This is a massive battle we're talking about. A massive battle. It didn't happen. It didn't happen. The Ukrainians didn't inflict these kind of casualties on the North Koreans. The North Koreans weren't engaged decisively in this fashion. To have 3,800 North Korean casualties means that the North Koreans have been given a significant sector of the battlefield, in which they have autonomy. I don't see that happening. I see the North Koreans, being brought in, their artillery units being brought in as part of a fire support plan managed by the Russians to learn how to do integrated fires, to learn how to do a call for fire, to be brought into, to train up on doing, direct support, general support fires. It's one thing to do it in theory, but now you're being brought to the battlefield. The battlefield is not meant to be a learning environment. So if it's going to become a learning environment, you don't want to put at risk an entire sector of the battlefield by bringing in inexperienced troops who aren't brought up to speed on Russian doctrine and things of that nature and say, here, this sector is yours. No, stupid, isn't going to happen, didn't happen. And so you have to understand that this is fiction on the part of, and why is Zelensky saying this? Well, he sort of gave away the farm. Because what they've been trying to do all along, this is what I believe has happened here. The North Koreans and the Russians were in negotiations about a military relationship. And there was an agreement being drafted. Now, prior to that agreement being ratified, and understand that an agreement isn't enforced until it's ratified. So let me again just introduce people to Russian realities. If you think for a second, Russia is going to initiate actions based upon an agreement that has yet to be ratified, you don't know Russia. It's not how the Russians work. The Russians need the I's dotted, the T's crossed. Now, it's an American thing, they don't dot their I's, but, they need their umlauts and their, all the little things they put on their alphabet. this has to happen before anything happens. There was already talk in the Western media about North Korean troops being on the ground in Russia in combat before this treaty was ratified, which means that's complete fiction. What probably happened is that you had advanced parties of North Korean attachés coming to the front line in anticipation of this larger agreement. Now, you can have smaller agreements. Understand that these soldiers aren't combatants; they're observers, and so they'll be attached to a unit. They'll be, to learn the unit. Hey, how are you guys doing? Who are the commanders? Let me look at how you guys are doing things. How could we modify this? What? So I think you had North Koreans, maybe numbering in the hundreds, in Russia at every level, beginning to observe and then report back, so that the units that are getting ready to come are being told, okay, don't bring this, bring this. You need to practice on this. Here's a list of the procedures, firing procedures we want you to look at. And they've sent that back, but only when the treaty or the agreement is ratified can the troops actually enter, because they have to have a legal standing. What is the legal status of these troops? When they come in, there has to be a legal status. You can't just bring them in. Russia is not a dictatorship. Russia is not some fanciful world where Vladimir Putin wakes up and goes, make this happen, like a starship, make it so. No, there's laws, treaties, the whole thing. As these people come in, what is the status of forces? What happens when somebody gets injured? Who's responsible for medical care? What if one of them gets drunk? What if one of them, rapes a Russian? What, crimes committed? This is what happens when you bring in thousands of foreign troops. Even though these might be hand-picked North Koreans, there's bad apples everywhere, and things like, you have to have all this has to be agreed upon as they come in. What's the casualty handling procedures when a North Korean dies? What's going to happen to the body? How's it going to be recovered, packaged? Is it going to be sent home, or is it going to be buried in the, all these things are down in the agreement. None of that existed when they were first talking about thousands of North Koreans on the soil. Why was this brought up? Because, first of all, the West wanted to use this. It was the West that propped this up initially to say, look, the North Koreans are coming in. This is an expansion of the conflict that therefore can justify our intervention. Except it doesn't. But that was what they tried to do. And that didn't work because they realized that they didn't have anything to intervene. And now that the West has failed to step up, Zelensky's using this as an example to shame the West, because that's what he did in his presentation. It was sought to shame the West. Can the West bring together 2 to 3 million people? No. Are they going to do this? No. Are they willing to fight for Ukraine? No. But the Russians, the North Koreans are. So he's shaming the West. That's his purpose. I strongly doubt that North Korean troops are engaged in combat on the scope of scale of which could generate 3,800 casualties. I just think that's a bold-faced lie. The Ukrainians have been lying about everything about the battlefield from day one. The West has promulgated this lies. Is it possible that Ukraine suffered some casualties? Absolutely. You know what it takes for a battalion to be destroyed? I mean, that's why I love when they bring in these stupid generals, former generals who are talking about things they just don't understand. What it would take to destroy a battalion in the field is the absolute collapse of the Russian army. The absolute collapse of the Russian army. Total lack of combat cohesion. Everything would have to fall apart. Supporting arms, basically the inability to maneuver, air power, all the advantages that Russia had would have been swept away, and the North Koreans would have had to stop fighting. Because a battalion of troops is hard to kill. And so this is just stupidity and fantasy in the extreme. We know what it takes to kill Ukrainians. We see it. Glide bombs, artillery, close in, destroy, major battles where the Ukrainians have the collapse in combat cohesion that we're talking about. None of that happened on the part of the Russians. Abdi Aladanov did an interesting video where you gotta love the guy's sense of humor. I mean, he has a soldier sense of humor. But he was talking to Ukrainian prisoners. He said, well, here we are. I know based upon what you heard yesterday, we were defeated and the enemy was marching on Moscow. But here we are. I mean, that don't believe any of that crap. They're killing. They're beating the Ukrainians. I mean, he was honest on day one. He said, "Yeah, they've attacked. We've got the situation under control. We've suffered casualties, but we're beating them back." Straight up honest. There's no subterfuge. He's the opposite of Zelensky when it comes to being honest about what's happening. And there's no panic in this guy's eyes. Ukraine didn't kill 3,800 or inflict 3,800 casualties on the North Koreans or on the Russians as a whole. That just didn't happen.
If you remember, with the first incursion in the Kursk region, they were talking about that maybe the United Kingdom is behind that sort of a strategy, that sort of attack. Right now, with the current phase of the conflict in Ukraine, what was the necessity of having a second incursion in the Kursk region while they're having a lot of problems in the main line of battlefield?
Well, first of all, I do believe that this is a continuation of the British advice being given to Zelensky, that the British General Staff and the British military, together with their intelligence services, are behind shaping the strategic posturing of Ukraine in order to keep Ukraine in the fight. In fact, I think there was something written about that where that's exactly the language. How do we keep Ukraine in the fight? It's a traditionally British way of phrasing something. Why would they need to do it now? Because Donald Trump's going to be president on January 20. Keith Kellogg was supposed to fly to Ukraine, where he was going to meet with the Ukrainians to talk about, the conditions of bringing it into this conflict. What would be required? Zelensky didn't want, and the British didn't want, because remember, the British are as against Donald Trump on this as you can imagine. It's not as though the British are saying, "Oh, we're working." The British are working against Donald Trump. So is most of NATO, which is why there isn't going to be a NATO much longer, because you don't get to stab an incoming president in the back like this, especially when he has an open grudge against the NATO and expect to survive for too long. So it's NATO committing suicide, England committing suicide. But what they needed to do is, before Keith Kellogg showed up, they needed to present a new reality on the ground, meaning that they needed to say, no, we're winning. Look, we're on the offensive in Kursk. They can't stop us. There was a pause, but we're winning. We're advancing. We're taking territory. And if you just continue to provide us with this support, we can continue to win like this, that this war isn't over. We don't want this war to end. We just want you to keep supplying us and equipping us and training us. That's the argument that was being made, or they're hoping to make. Notice that Keith Kellogg's not coming to Ukraine right now. Why? Because Ukraine just got the snot knocked out of them. This offensive is over. They're dying. All their strategic reserves again burned up. Multiple videos of the Challenger tank being destroyed. There was only 14 of them to begin with. A couple of them got roasted at the Robotyno in the great 2023 summer offensive, but the others were held in reserve. But now we're seeing them get knocked off on a regular basis in the Kursk area, along with M1 tanks and advanced T-72 modern versions, etc. So Keith Kellogg can't go right now because it's not if he shows up, and the Ukrainians say, well, we they don't know what to say, except we just got our asses kicked. So he's not coming. There won't be a meeting right now because the Ukrainians aren't prepared to host that meeting because they just lost. The British need to find a way to, reimagine this defeat into something else and start, I think, and that's what we're seeing right now. It's not going to be about a Ukrainian victory. It's going to be that the Ukrainians are fighting against two enemies. Russia, whom they're ready to defeat, but now the North Koreans, who are, able to pour in thousands, tens of thousands, 500,000. I mean, that was, Zelensky, 500,000 troops. What are you going to do, Europe, to do this? Trump, we need your help. You can't let those North Korean hordes come marching in here and do all this. You need to use your leadership to get Europe. That's the game being played. And Trump's going to have none of it. None of it. I think Trump has realized now that, and the Russians are smart too. They basically have said that there won't be a meeting with Trump until at least March. Why? They need the reality. Trump's not president right now. He becomes president on January 20th. Russia's going to spend the month of February schooling Trump on the reality on the ground in Ukraine. They're not going to talk to him. They're not going to listen to him. They're just going to say, watch the battlefield, watch the map. This is the reality. And there's nothing you can do to stop this. You can bring in as much equipment as you want to. We'll destroy it all. And by the time you bring in the equipment, we'll have already advanced and taken territories that you don't want us to take. Therefore, you need to go to Ukraine. And the only way to stop this war is tell Ukraine it's over. That's the only way to stop this war. It's over. Russia gets what Russia wants. And that's the meeting that'll happen in March if Trump is there. Now, Trump could easily say, no, peace through strength. We can't yield the advantage to Russia like this. We're going to lengthen this war, but they won't. I think the rate of collapse right now is such that February will be a decisive month. So by the time March rolls around, the battlefield will look completely different than what it looks like right now. Maybe all of Donbass will have been recaptured. Zaporizhia, Kherson will also be in advances into Dnipropetrovsk, Kharkov. You'll see the reduction of Ukrainian presence there. Kursk freed, maybe moving into Sumy, and the Russians preparing to make a pivot into Odessa. All of this will be what's presented to Trump, and if he's honest to himself, he's going to turn to people and say, okay, what if we wanted to pour in $100 billion? Well, Mr. President, I mean, there's nothing to buy. We're out of ATACMS. We don't have anything left to give them. We're out of this. We're out of that. The Europeans have nothing. Even if they step up, they won't be able to have anything ready to deliver by, late summer, fall, and the battle's over. And then so Trump will say, well, then we have to recognize this reality. Let's roll with it. That's what's going on right now. It's total panic on the part of Zelensky and the British.
Do you think that they're going to talk about how the situation of Odessa? I think it's so tricky right now, as Putin was talking about Odessa as an apple of discord between the two parties. It seems that they're thinking of having some sort of leverage at the end of the conflict if everything goes to the direction of negotiations, talks between the United States and Russia. They're not going to let Odessa be totally under the control of Ukrainians. Do you feel that way?
I think the best Ukraine can hope for right now is that Odessa will be demilitarized, and while it won't be Russia, it'll be placed under some sort of Russian-sponsored control, independent of Kiev. And that the Russians will be pushing for some sort of internationally monitored referendum in Odessa to give the people a choice of self-determination. And I think Kharkov will be the same way. Depending on how far Russia advances into Dnipropetrovsk, that'll be the same thing. Mykolaiv, and maybe Sumy now. I think the Russians may be throwing in Sumy because they seek to punish the Ukrainians for moving into Kursk. But I think that's the direction that the Russians are heading. They'll take what they're given, meaning, but basically Russia will say, look, we'll stop where Russian territory stops. There will be a buffer zone, a demilitarized zone, and a denazified zone along with the rest of Ukraine. But no, we're going to be we're going to allow the people of these territories to decide who they want to govern. And I think that's the direction Russia is leaning towards if we're talking about a rapid conclusion to this conflict. If Ukraine or the United States is unwilling to do that, then Russia's prepared to fight through 2027. Anybody thinks that this has to be done by Victory Day doesn't know the Russians. They don't let calendars dictate their operational requirements. Their defense industry, their economy is geared towards keeping this thing going for another 2 years if need be. Europe can't do that. The United States is, Trump isn't ready, doesn't want to do that. That's a different priority. And Ukraine can't sustain this fight. So the Russians will get what the Russians want. If the West can't find a way to compel Ukraine to, bring an end to this conflict, then Russia will just destroy Ukraine and occupy the territories that it wants to occupy. I think it would prefer not to do that. But Putin cannot walk away from these territories and the Russian people that are in these territories. And while Russia may not actually conquer them, they will eventually become part of Russia, because Russia will create the conditions in which there will be referendum held where Russia prevails. And that's that. Russia may get defeated in Sumy. I don't know. But I don't think they're going to lose in Odessa. I don't think they're going to lose in Kharkov. And Mykolaiv is, one of the compelling factors the Russians will have is just the economic reality. I think Russia, one of the things that you'll see Russia do in a post-conflict environment is immediately come into these territories and start to work to reestablish, to link it back up with critical infrastructure, water, electricity, etc., roads. And Russia will say the future is with Russia. We're the ones that can fix this. They've abandoned you. They destroyed you. And that'll also play a heavy, role in influencing whatever the future vote will be. But, is this the way a referendum's supposed to be done? No. But Russia's is not going to go the route of referendum just to see themselves losing a vote. The referendum is going to be gamed to the favor of Russia. As a way of Russia getting these territories. Look, Ukraine, this didn't have to be. I don't feel sorry for Ukraine. We shouldn't be having this conversation. If Ukraine had accepted the Istanbul communique, Kherson and Zaporizhia would be Ukrainian. And we wouldn't be talking about referendum in Odessa and Kharkov and Dnipropetrovsk and others. We wouldn't be talking about this. There would be no need for that. The fact that we're talking about this is because Ukraine made the decision to continue the conflict. And when you make stupid choices, you pay stupid, you win stupid prizes. And the prize they're going to win is they're going to lose another 20-25% of their country.
Zelensky, in the same interview that I've played a section of it, he said that for any sort of negotiations, there has to be a guarantee for Ukraine joining NATO. How is that possible? Is that going to put Donald Trump in a much more difficult position to convince Ukrainians?
Well, first of all, you speak of Zelensky as if he's politically viable. Zelensky's dead man walking. He's not going to be president of Ukraine for much longer. He has no legitimacy. He's not going to sit at a negotiating table. And if he starts playing stupid games with Donald Trump will just pull the plug until somebody puts a bullet in Zelensky's brain or kicks him out of the country. Zelensky isn't the solution. He's the problem. And everybody recognizes this. Right now, as long as Biden's in, they can't be honest about it. But watch how quickly the tables turn on Zelensky. He's the problem. Watch the parade of press reports come out about the corruption of Zelensky, the incompetence of Zelensky. It's all the stories that the Western media has suppressed or been ordered to suppress for years will now start coming about how absolutely horrific of a leader this man is. His drug abuse, his inability to focus. You saw the interview. I don't have to say it to you. You know what you saw. You know what you saw. You know it. Everybody knows it, but nobody wants to admit it. The man is a drug addict. The man is under the influence of chemicals. His brain is fried. That is not that the thinking there is not the thinking of a rational man. It's the kind of conversation you have with somebody who's been up for a week, popping pills to stay awake, and the twitchy and the inability to coherently go forward and wrap everything up, just the whole twitchy aspect of his persona. The man is a disaster. And so the idea that Zelensky's going to hold Trump hostage to anything, first of all, there isn't going to be a NATO for Ukraine to join. Donald Trump is making this as clear as possible. And you just watch how quick he's going to turn to NATO and say, "No, if you guys want to exist, you got to put the money up. We're not going to do that." And if NATO starts giving him pushback, he says, "We're out of NATO. We're out. We're done. We're finished." And he's looking for an excuse to do that. And to be honest, again, once Trump is in power, all of the backstabbing that's taking place right now, where Europe is bad-mouthing Trump, stabbing Trump in the back, doing policies designed to tie his hands. Trump is a vindictive son of a bitch. You think Donald Trump is going to sit there and let this stuff happen and not do anything about it? I'm not saying it's right. I'm not saying it's sound. I'm just saying that's who Donald Trump is. Donald Trump takes everything personally. Everything personally. That's why, Vladimir Putin, look at what Putin has done. What insults has Putin put out there towards Trump? Not a single one. And he could, easily. Instead, he was glowing about Donald Trump, about the courage of this man when he was shot, how it showed the true character of this person, standing up, fight, fight, fight. Donald Trump is resilient, is brilliant, is this. Trump's listening to that, then he's turning around and looking at all the Europeans plotting behind his back as if he's not going to be president. That's what I don't understand. These people are going, "Hi. Okay, now we're going to screw him this way. We're going to do this. Okay, I want you to do this. Hi. Okay, we're going to do." And Trump's just sitting there going, "Guys, I can hear you. I hear you. I'm going to screw you. You're dead. You're dead to me. That's okay." Blah, blah. Trump doesn't care about Europe. Doesn't at all. That's what Europe's going to find out. See, Biden has this, establishment nostalgia for Europe. I mean, NATO is a sacred, oh man, he almost cries when he says it's a sacred obligation. Article 5, a sacred. No, it's not. First of all, read it. Nothing sacred about that. It just basically says, yeah, we'll consider it. That's it. That's all Article 5 says. We'll consider it. No, it doesn't compel you to do anything except consider it. Well, yeah, we may give you military force, but we're not compelled to. We don't have to. That's Article 5. That's the reality of Article 5. Biden is of an age where he can remember when Article 5 during the Cold War was geared towards automatically present. That was the whole idea of what was going on during the Cold War, where NATO had built up this military at great expense that was ready to fight right now. All the decisions had been pre-made, so that when the Soviets came across the border, it was automatic. Boom, 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 boom. They were ready to do it. Since that time, that military structure is gone. Nations have withdrawn into themselves. And now what has to happen, if you're going to do that kind of stuff, is they have to talk about it. First of all, you got to build up your military, because your military is not, no NATO military right now is ready to fight the kind of war we were ready to fight in the 1980s. Not even the American military. No military. So in order to get to that point, nations now have to make certain decisions. And these are politically difficult decisions given the state of the economy, given the fact that all of the political and economic elites that created this debacle known as Europe today are collapsing one by one by one. I mean, it's just duck, 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 duck. Most predictable thing in the world. In fact, as I predicted, I think in December of 2021, that if you sanction Russia, you will generate economic blowback that will lead to revolutionary political change in Europe. Thank you very much. It's exactly what's happened. Revolutionary change. It doesn't mean people in the streets burning things down, but it means revolutionary change in terms of the people are revolting against the establishment. How do you explain what happened in Austria? How do you explain what's happening in Germany? What's happening in France? What's happening in England? Andrew Tate's running for Prime Minister of England. And you know what? He's as viable as any politician now, because the political state of affairs in England is so pathetic and so corrupt that people have lost faith in anybody who was once a politician. So you have a fresh face like Andrew Tate coming in, who isn't afraid to talk, isn't going to, He has no constituency of corrupt power elites that he has to worry about. He's just going to say things. I don't know if he's going to win. It's a long shot. But hey, that's revolutionary change. That's what's happening in Europe. Is things that would have been considered a long shot or impossible are now possible or can be envisioned because of the corruption of the political and economic elite who have committed suicide by sanctioning Russia and getting entangled in this conflict in Ukraine. Trump only associates with winners. Europe is not a winner right now. They are losers with a capital L stapled to their head. And they're only getting worse. NATO is a finished organization. It's done. So now Ukraine, Zelensky is so stupid he doesn't understand the predicament that he's in. First of all, he doesn't realize that he's been sacrificed. I mean, Tony Blinken just gave a ridiculous farewell, interview to the New York Times where he talks about, we secretly gave them, javelins and stingers. Come on, Tony, don't pretend that this all started in 2022. How about we secretly built bases in Western Ukraine where we were training them back in 2015 all the way up to 2022 to fight a war with Russia? Yeah. Oh, wait, Tony, but we can go back in where we secretly overthrew the government of Viktor Yanukovych in 2014 because we couldn't have Russian political elites in Ukraine interfering with our grand strategy of using Ukraine as a tool to bring down Russia. Wait, Tony, we can go back even more. We secretly empowered the Western Ukrainian nationalists to steal an election in 2004, 2005 that Viktor Yanukovych won. He did win it, yes, but no, we came in with the Orange Revolution and undid it illegally, put in Western Ukrainian nationalists who were supposed to permanently suppress the Russian political voice of Viktor Yanukovych. But it didn't work because in 2010, Viktor Yanukovych got reelected. And that we went cannot be allowed to happen. We can't have the Russians of Ukraine being politically viable because they interfere with our master plan of using Ukraine to bring down Russia. So 2014 came in, and we can keep going all the way back to 1948, 1949, where we made common cause with the Galen organization to ally ourselves with the Banderist movement inside Ukraine, and we provided them with arms, weaponry. We parachuted troops in to keep an insurgency going designed to undermine Soviet authority. This is something we've been doing from day one. That's the reality. Nobody likes to talk about it. We like to pretend that Russia is the aggressor, that this is all because of Russia. Russia is the only power that has sought a peaceful outcome here. The only power. The Minsk Accords were something that France and Germany went and begged Putin to go into, even though Russia was giving up all of the advantages that had been accrued up until that point. But Putin did it. Why? Looking for a peaceful outcome. And then for several years, Putin was jerked around by these people. In June of 2021, Putin confronted Biden in Geneva and said, we need Minsk. If you want to stop the Russian troop movements that you're so worried about, Russian troop movements on Russian soil, tend to forget that little finer point. But if you want to stop that, Minsk, make it happen. Biden promised, but then Blinken lied. Blinken didn't do anything, did the opposite because they never wanted Minsk. Why? Well, we found out Angela Merkel, Francois Hollande, and Poroshenko, the Ukrainian president, all admitted it's a sham, it was a fake, it was a lie. It was designed to buy time, to build up the Ukrainian army so that they could seize control of the Donbass. That's what Minsk was about, a lie. And even after the Russians confronted the French and the Germans about their lie in the fall of 2021, and finally got acknowledgement from them that they weren't going to push for Minsk, and Russia said Minsk is dead, they didn't invade. They tried to put draft treaties out there. December 17th, 2021, 2 treaties, one to NATO, one to the United States, seeking a new European security framework to avoid the war that the West wanted. The West wanted this war. Tony Blinken secretly providing ammunition to them for this war. Russia didn't want this war. Blinken did. Now there's 1 million dead Ukrainians whose blood is on the hands of Tony Blinken, the United States, Francois Hollande, Angela Merkel, and every single European and American politician who supported that policy. You know who doesn't have any Ukrainian blood on his hand? Vladimir Putin. because he didn't want this. That's the reality. And Zelensky's living in a never land to pretend that somehow he is the victim of Russian aggression. No, he is the victim of Western, lies, of a Western strategy that has always, from day one, been about sacrificing Ukraine for the larger objective of bringing down Russia. Well, Zelensky, you're being sacrificed right now. How does it feel?
Here is the segment that you were talking about, Scott, because I have a question about what Antony Blinken said in this interview.
To me, as I said before, in the absence of American diplomacy, you're going to have
this one.
So first, if you look at the trajectory of the conflict, because we saw it coming, we were able to make sure that not only were we prepared and allies and partners were prepared, but that the Ukraine was prepared. We made sure that well before the Russian aggression happened, starting in September, the Russian aggression happened in February, starting in September and then again in December, we quietly got a lot of weapons to Ukraine to make sure that they had in hand what they needed to defend themselves. Things like Stingers, javelins that they could use that were instrumental in preventing Russia from taking Kyiv, from rolling over the country, erasing it from the map, and indeed pushing the Russians back.
Yeah, two questions would be, he's trying to picture the conflict as though Russia wanted to capture all of Ukraine.
Yeah.
And the second one, the interviewer is not pushing for why did you not negotiate with Russia? And he's not talking about any sort of negotiations.
Understand that this is not your classic interview. If you go back to that clip, you'll notice something. She's got an iPad in front of her. She's scrolling through. This is a scripted interview. This is an interview done. Look at the lighting. Look at everything. This is an interview being done at the behest of the State Department as part of to establish the legacy of the Biden administration on the eve of their losing power, stepping down. It's about Blinken, trying to shape the public narrative, but it fails on a number of things. Again, I just want to make the following point. Blinken thinks we're stupid because, frankly speaking, most people are stupid. How many people today, when we talk about the Ukraine conflict, remember the summit between Biden and Putin in June of 2021? I remember it. Do you remember why we had that summit? Because America was worried about Russian troop movement. Why was America worried about Russian troop movement? Because of NATO preparations inside Ukraine to empower Ukrainian military to make an offensive against the Donbass. Russian troops just don't move on their own. Cause and effect relationship. And Putin told Biden at that time, we need Minsk. What's important about what old Blinken said here? In September, we quietly started sending weapons because we knew what was going to happen. Why did you know it was going to happen? Russia already told you they weren't going to make any move against Ukraine if Minsk was in. Biden committed you, Blinken, to make Minsk happen. Blinken's admitting he had no intention of making the Minsk happen. That basically this was a setup. This was a setup. How did the United States know that Russia was going to take military action? Because they were provoking it. They were doing everything possible to make it happen. And the Russians were onto this. That's why once the weapons started flowing in September, the next month in October, the Russians confront the French and the Germans directly, not using the United States because they can't trust America. That's the other thing that Tony Blinken doesn't understand. That little statement about sending weapons in September sent a signal to the Russians that the United States can't be trusted. That the president of the United States, when he sat down with the president of Russia and gave his assurances that certain things would happen, was lying and is a liar. That's a huge wake-up call for the Russians. People say, well, why doesn't Russia trust the West? There we go. It's one of the reasons, one of the many reasons. But no, September, we start quietly sending the weapons as if the Russian intelligence wasn't aware of it, which they were. And because the Russian intelligence was aware of it, they briefed the Russian leadership. The Russian leadership confronted the French and the Germans in October. The French and Germans made it clear that they weren't going to push for Minsk. And then the Russians shut it down. Now, the Russians put forward this draft treaty. How did we respond? By giving it consideration? Oh no, Tony Blinken says we quietly continued to ship the weapons. Why? Because we were rejecting these treaties because we were creating the conditions for war. We made this war happen. That's the truth. And we've been trying to have this war for some time now. You know, getting Ukraine ready. Remember, the whole reason for Minsk was to buy time so that NATO could train a Ukrainian military capable of standing up to the Russians. And by 2021, 2022, we had that military. Now, the military wasn't, here's the other thing where Blinken is just a straight up liar. The Ukrainian military was never supposed to defeat the Russians. Never. Wasn't supposed to happen. You want to know why Tony Blinken's a lying sack of manure? Well, let's talk about General Miley. Let's talk about William Burns. These are two very senior people in the United States. One is was the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. The other one is the director of the CIA. Now, Blinken, remember, they're going to give statements to the White House in January and February, assessments about what's going to happen. Now, Blinken just told you that we've provided them with stingers and javelins so that they could defeat the Russians, push them back. Well, if that was the purpose of the provision of the stingers and javelins, then why did William Burns and General Miley both brief the President of the United States and the Congress of the United States that the war would be over in 3 to 7 days? Just a simple question I'd like to ask Anthony Blinken, who's Secretary of State. Did you disagree with that assessment, Mr. Secretary of State? If so, why were you silent? Why didn't you step up and say, no, they're going to win because we've given them stingers and javelins. But wait a minute, stingers and javelins, these are defensive systems. Now, the javelins can be used, but they're defensive systems. You are giving Ukraine systems that would enable Ukraine to launch or to carry out a resistance, a long-term resistance. These are weapons that can be hidden in the backs of cars, in buildings, shoot down airplanes, blow up tanks. But you're not giving them tanks, you're not giving them artillery, you're not giving artillery ammunition, the things you would actually need. A lot of people don't discuss how many casualties the Ukrainians suffered in the first phase of this conflict. What happened to the Ukrainian military? We've seen a lot of videos of what happened to the Russian military. I mean, Marat Kurilin said he's a Russian journalist, has a fantastic Substack page in English. I advise everybody to go read it. But when I talked to him about this, he was on the ground in the Donbass, working with the Donetsk People's Army, the militia. And when he found out that the Russians were intervening, he immediately told all of his Donetsk People's Militia guys, "Hey, stand down. Let's watch the real guys come in and do it. They're going to teach us a couple of things." And they watched the Russian army come in, and he said, "What the hell are they doing? I mean, there's no flank protection. They're just doing they're making mistakes that, we being the Donetsk people, we made in 2014, 2015, but we learned our lesson. That's why we're alive. We learned not to do these things." And the Russians went out there and overextended and got ambushed, and they took casualties. But the Russian military still had enough oomph behind it where they destroyed the Ukrainian army, literally destroyed the Ukrainian army, crushed it. Ukrainians were able to hold on, but the Russians never intended to take Kiev. That's where Tony Blinken's lying. And he knows this. He knows the Russians never intended to take Kiev. The Russians were trying to demilitarize the Ukrainians by destroying as much military equipment as possible, and then get the Ukrainians to go to the negotiating table where they would agree to a peace on terms acceptable to Russia. And it worked. Within 6 days of this offensive that Tony Blinken now is sitting there saying, "Oh, we empowered the Ukrainians." When the Ukrainians were getting their asses handed to them so badly that the Ukrainian negotiators said, "How do we bring an end to this conflict?" Less than a month later, they have a finished draft treaty, the Istanbul Communique, signed off by everybody. Why? Because Russia was winning. That's what people don't understand. The Russians weren't losing. The Russians were winning. It was an ugly victory because as Karelin said, they made a lot of amateur mistakes early on. But the Russians won phase one hand down. It was never about taking Kiev. It was always about shaping the battlefield to achieve dominance, to destroy as much of Ukrainian military power as possible, to put political pressure on the Ukrainian politicians to negotiate an end to it. This isn't revisionist history. This is actually what happened that Tony Blinken doesn't want to talk about because he's a liar. And then Blinken, together with Boris Johnson and others, Johnson intervened. He happened to be the face of this policy, but it was something that was negotiated between NATO and that said, no, we're not going to let you end this conflict. You see, the goal wasn't to have Ukraine beat the Russians. Never was. The goal was always to have Ukraine turn into a tar baby for the Russians. Tar baby is a reference to an American folk tale, a Brer Rabbit. And tar baby is something, once you grab onto it, you can't ungrab it. It's sort of stuck to you. And that's what Ukraine was supposed to be for Russia. That's why the javelins and the stingers were flooded in there. But the Russians beat that. And, again, people don't talk about, but what was the CIA doing in Ukraine from, 2015 onwards? Establishing 20 bases. If you want an idea what a CIA base is, there's a movie, 13 Days. It's about Benghazi and what happened there. The fight in defense of a CIA base, one CIA base in Libya, doing one mission, which was tracking down weapons and bringing them under control and shipping them out. That's it. We're not talking about a station running the whole country. A base is, geographically located with a singular mission. Look at that. Look at the manpower that was committed to that base, the resources committed to that base. And now understand that the CIA had 20 of those. Larry Johnson, in a recent interview, said that in Vietnam, for the entirety of the Vietnam War, the CIA had 12 to 16 bases. 20 bases were set up inside Ukraine, CIA bases. Many of them were involved in training the so-called stay-behind forces, Ukrainian special forces who would be skilled in unconventional warfare, guerrilla warfare. Their job was to let the Russians overrun them and then lead this resistance with the stingers and the javelins, which we were flooding into the system. But this wasn't happening. The resistance wasn't, doing what we wanted it to do. The Russian populations of these territories were rising up and supporting the Russians. And so we needed this conflict to continue. So we extended it now, and we turned it into, instead of an occupied Ukraine resisting the Russians, we were going to now bleed Ukraine to death in a long, drawn-out war, which we knew ultimately that Ukraine could not win. And I just want to make that point. We knew from the start Ukraine could not win this war. Ukraine was never supposed to win this war. All Ukraine was supposed to do is make this war last a long time and inflict enough harm on Russia economically and militarily that it led to the political collapse of the Putin regime, therefore fulfilling the strategic objective of the strategic defeat of Russia. That's what this was all about. It was never about Ukrainian democracy. It was never about, doing right by Ukraine or European sovereignty or none of that. It was always about the strategic defeat of Russia, which is something we've been seeking back since when it was called the Soviet Union, since 1948, 49, using Ukraine to achieve that. That's all this is. It's the same thing. So forget Blinken's lies and all this stuff. This was about sacrificing Ukraine in a gambit to bring down Russia. That's it. That's all that's going on here. And it's a failed gambit. Russia will not be brought down. It's Ukraine that is strategically defeated. And it's NATO that's strategically defeated. It's Europe that's strategically defeated. And if the United States isn't careful about how they disentangle themselves from this, we will be strategically defeated.
You mentioned the role of the United Kingdom in the Kursk region. Do you think that right now this is a crucial moment for the European countries? They have to decide what do they want to be in the near future and in a long run. Do you think that they're gonna be closer to the United Kingdom or to the United States under Donald Trump?
I don't mean to smile, but who wants to get close to the United Kingdom right now? It stinks. It's rancid. It's horrible. It's not a model for anything. I mean, even if the Ukrainians weren't so delusional, they'd look to the British and say, "You guys can't even manage your own affairs. You're going to sit here and tell me how to run a multi-brigade offensive operation in Kursk when you can't even get one brigade out of the barracks." Starmer's history. There's going to be an election, and he's done. He's finished. Who's going to replace him? We don't know. Maybe Andrew Tate, but we don't know. Europe. Schultz is gone. There's going to be a vote, an election. Maybe AFD wins. AFD is going to be there. It's going to be powerful. That's a change. Europe is changing. In France, Emmanuel Macron is over 60% of the population want him gone. Over 50% of the population want to dissolve the government. If this happens, Marine Le Pen's party is going to win. There'll be a dramatic, change in the policy. So who are you talking about wanting to do what to whom? You want Ukraine to get closer to Europe? There is no Europe. Europe's finished. Europe is nothing. It's a blue flag with yellow stars. That's it. There's nothing to Europe right now. It is collapsing as we speak. Get closer to NATO. NATO's finished. NATO is done. Donald Trump doesn't want NATO. He's going to cashier NATO. Going to get out of this. He's going to set up the big trap where he's going to say if Europe and NATO want to be viable, they have to fund themselves. And nobody can fund it. He's going to say, I'm pulling the plug. I'm done. I'm finished. Now, Ukraine wants to become closer to the United States. We don't want to be closer to Ukraine. That decision has been made. We are done with Ukraine. It's a sad reality, something I tried to tell the Ukrainians all along. We don't like you. We don't care about you. All these people that sit there and put your flag on their social media platforms, to try and show that they're hip, they're not going to sacrifice for you. They're doing it for self-enrichment. You know how many people have gotten rich raising money for Ukraine? I mean, come on. Ukraine is a joke nation. It's a joke cause. It's just corrupt as the day is long. It is about Stepan Bandera when you take away all the frills and the gloss. It's about an evil ideology that we just want to pretend doesn't exist. It does exist. It's the reality of Ukraine. America doesn't want to have anything to do with that. And we're going to run away from Ukraine like Ukraine's never seen people run away from before. If they think the United States is going to sacrifice everything for this stinking corpse of a nation, no. Ukraine lives in a fantasy world right now. At the end of the day, Donald Trump is about creating what I call Fortress America, which will be the core foundation of an American empire. He wants it to be an economic empire, not a military empire. The military power of the United States will be used to protect Fortress America. In order to do that, he has to disentangle himself from, all of these agreements we have around the world that lead us to becoming the world's policeman. He doesn't want America to be the world's police force. He doesn't want America to spend trillions of dollars in failed wars across the globe that only turn the world against us. He is rightfully acknowledged. I think in September, he gave a presentation where he said America is its own worst enemy. We are the problem, and our NATO is a problem. This whole relationship we have is a problem. We have to stop that, sever that. That's what's going to happen. The world needs to wake up. And normally people would say, well, if you just hold your breath for 4 years, we can ride this one out. You ain't riding this one out. First of all, there's no political opposition to Donald Trump in the United States whatsoever. You remember how he was called enemy of democracy? You can't let him in because it's the death of democracy. The world's going to end. He's the worst thing in the world. Da 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 da. Yesterday, Congress went, yeah, he's the president. All the Democrats who said he's a threat to democracy, the same thing as Adolf Hitler, da da da, didn't raise a stink. Why? Because they stand for nothing. They are nothing. They have no power. They have no ability to impose their will on this man who will govern as a veritable dictator. I'm not proud of this. I'm not defending. I'm just telling you what the facts are. And as an American, these are ugly facts. Nobody wants a president governing in that fashion, but he's going to. And he's going to empower his vice president, J.D. Vance, who's a very young man. And J.D. Vance will become the face of this new political revolution in America called MAGA. And he will become president in 4 years. And he will have an 8-year presidency because the Democrats will not be able to challenge him. And if he's wise in his selection of a vice president, maybe Tulsi Gabbard, she will become president and she will rule for 8 years. So we're looking at a 20-year run right now of MAGA. And in 20 years, because there is no opposition to us worthy of the name, both here in the United States and around the world, if they stay true to Trump's vision, you're going to see a completely different world. Under the classic duopoly, America was an empire in decline. I think you're going to see the revival of the American empire. It won't be the post-World War II militaristic enterprise that has failed. It's going to be a post-Cold War, whatever you want to call this era, global war on terror, redefinition of America, where we create a fortress America that is self-sufficient, not dependent upon anybody for what makes us great. And then we'll turn that into an economic engine that will compete globally. That's the vision. And frankly speaking, I don't see any impediment to that division, that vision. None. The Russians aren't looking for global domination. The Russians are looking for their sphere of influence. And I think Donald Trump is more than happy to give Russia its sphere of influence and then compete against that. China is looking for its sphere of influence. What Trump wants to do is be able to keep China and Russia from joining forces and through BRICS. And so he needs to compete with BRICS. And that's what his focus is going to be on. And he understands that if he continues to play the militaristic game, that we lose. That what you need to do is actually go out there and compete, be a better businessman on the business battlefield. But you can't do that unless you have secure supply chains, if you have secure resources. You can't do that unless you control your slice of the world the same way others control theirs. America can't succeed as a democracy amongst democracies. America can only succeed if we dominate our neighbors. And we are looking at decades of American domination of both Mexico and Canada. You see the open mocking of Canada right now by Donald Trump. Open mocking of it. Is he serious about absorbing Canada? Right now, I still think it's a joke, but I'm telling you what? Fortress America functions better if Canada is under our political and economic domination. Now, we can do that either by transforming it into an extension of the United States or by just having its government basically get on its knees and do whatever we want. Mexico, more difficult problem, but nonetheless, if we solidify relations to the north, seal that up, we can pacify Mexico, and we'll do the same thing. We'll make Mexico yield to us, and then we'll make all of South America yield to us. And now we've defined Fortress America. And with the resources contained in there, the United States doesn't need to worry about competing with China for African and Asian resources for survival. We'll now do it just for economic domination. It's not a pretty world, but that's the direction we're heading right now. Is a direction of Trump. He's going to take this Panama Canal. If you don't think he's going to take the Panama Canal, you don't know Donald Trump. And I'm pretty sure he's going to end up buying Greenland as well, because you don't know Donald Trump if you think he's not. So, and then with Canada, we may not make Canada, part of the United States, but look at the United States. Look, he's set it forth. We're not going to give you $100 billion of subsidies. That just isn't going to happen. How does Canada survive without American subsidies? It either becomes a part of America or it subordinates itself totally to America so that its economy is de facto extension of the American economy. That's the direction that Trump is taking it. And given the political dysfunction in Canada, this is the reason why Trump is able to do this, because all across Europe and Canada and elsewhere in the Western world, you have these dysfunctional neoliberal governments that have been in place, these political and economic elites that have been ruling based upon a world that was built on the foundation of the rules-based international order. That's the American-dominated system. That system is failing, and Trump knows it. Trump sees it. So Trump's going to change the system, but all these people have been riding off of that, living, surviving on the periphery. When that system collapses and redefines, there's nothing to hold them up. And you're seeing Canada collapse, you see Great Britain collapse, Germany collapsing, France collapsing, South Korea collapsing. Japan will collapse. They will all collapse because without that core American militarist, hegemon, they're nothing. And when Trump seeks to redefine what America is, these people will be left basically as the veneer on an empty shell, and they will collapse. That's the state of the world today. That's the direction we're heading.
The other part of the conflict is in the Middle East, Scott. You haven't mentioned that. We've learned from according to a government committee in Israel, the Jerusalem Post reported that Israel must prepare for a potential war with Turkey or Turkey. And do you think right now it was Iran, right now Turkey, how long does it take to bring some sort of sanity to the Middle East?
There's a couple things. I think the most immediate problem facing Israel and the United States, and the reason why I bring that up is, frankly, we're in an American-centric world right now where the only thing that matters is what matters to America. And Israel is what matters to America in the Middle East. But we're also smart enough, Trump is smart enough to know that an Israeli-American attack on Iran would lead to disastrous, consequences in terms of Iran, because we can't knock Iran out. So Iran would retaliate, and the retaliation would be the destruction of Middle East energy resources, which would throw the world into an economic crisis that is the last thing Trump needs when he's trying to build Fortress America. But Trump also has been given a gift, and that gift is the collapse of the government of Bashar al-Assad and what that's done to the axis of resistance and such. Doesn't mean the fighting's over. I mean, we'll find out what's going to happen to Hezbollah when the ceasefire that was negotiated with the Israelis in November expires this month. 60 days. Israel said, we're not withdrawing from southern Lebanon. I think you're going to see Hezbollah become a resistance movement whose function is to evict Israel from Lebanese territory, and Israel is going to be trapped in a conflict in southern Lebanon that they can't win. But this time, Hezbollah won't be backed by Iran. The umbilical has been cut, and Iran is looking to create its own fortress Iran. You're going to see a lot of consolidation of power around as people seek to redefine power structures. Iran on January 17th, 3 days before Trump becomes president, will sign a strategic agreement with Russia that will be a game changer. Trump will have to take that into consideration for anything he does, to include the potential of an attack on Iran. But the Iranians have also signaled they're ready to have negotiations. If you remember, in 2018, Donald Trump withdrew from the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, the JCPOA, because he called it a bad deal. And again, you can say what you want about Donald Trump. He's the most honest politician we have out there right now, bar none. He may be stupid, and I've accused him of that many times, but he's not going to lie to you. Okay? Obama lied to the American people in the world. Obama signed an agreement, or entered an agreement in 2015 that he didn't believe in, and he lied to us about it. He said that it was there to create a breakout window of 1 year for Iran's nuclear program to become a nuclear weapons program. But he did it through this, because he couldn't deny the Iranians their NPT rights under Article 4, which means they can enrich uranium. He couldn't do that in perpetuity, so there was these sunset clauses. And the sunset clauses, as they expired, allowed Iran to install more modern centrifuges and to accrue greater stockpiles of enriched materials, so that the 1 year window disappeared. Obama, in April of 2015, a couple months before the JCPOA entered into effect, gave an interview with NPR where somebody asked him about, well, what happens when the sunset clause? He said, well, we will re-engage on that issue at that time, meaning the United States had no intention of allowing the sunset clauses, that if Iran didn't change and voluntarily walk away from this nuclear program, that the United States would have intervened at that point in time to pull out of the JCPOA or somehow ensure that Iran never got this capacity. The JCPOA was just about buying time. Trump comes in and he, confronts the intelligence community. He says, wait a minute, time out. You guys did an assessment in 2007, right? Yes, boss. And in that assessment, you said that Iran had a secret nuclear weapons program as of 2003, right? Oh, yes, boss. And then they voluntarily did away with it, right? Yes, boss. And there's no evidence that they're doing it today. Yep, right. Where is it? Oh, we don't know. What was it? We don't know. Do you know anything about it? We don't know. Well, what happens if Iran wants to, because now you've just signed a deal that says at the end of the sunset clauses, they're going to have all the enrichment capability, all the enriched material, and they have a nuclear weapons program that you don't know anything about. It just magically went away. What happens when it comes back? This is a bad deal. And he's right. From that standpoint, it's a 100% bad deal. Bad deal. Good deal for the Iranians. Bad deal for the United States and Israel. And he said, we're done. I'm not doing this. Pulling the plug. But the interesting thing is he didn't say, okay, bad deal, now let's attack Iran and eliminate their regime, which is what Israel wanted. What Trump said is, I want a better deal. See, Trump's looking for a deal. He's not looking for a war. He's looking for a deal. And now you have an Iranian president who says, yeah, we'd like a deal too. We're not looking for a war. According to statements, according to the Turkish foreign minister, who apparently had conversations with the new Iranian president, the president said, we don't want to fight with Israel. We don't want to fight with the United States. We're not looking for confrontation. We're looking for, normalized relations, maybe not with Israel, but we're not looking for war, but we're looking for, BRICS and doing all this stuff. But we also want to work with the West. We're not totally jumping over to BRICS. We'd like to work with the West, and we're willing to negotiate. And the implication is the only thing to negotiate that they can negotiate was their nuclear program. So I think you're going to see Trump, rather than coming in trying to start a war with Iran, Trump's going to come in and try and negotiate away a war. And the Iranians, I think, are going to work with him. And Trump will have to be somewhat constrained. For instance, in the past, the United States has linked Iran's nuclear program with their ballistic missile program because the Israelis have told us to do so. But Iran's not going to give up their ballistic missile program. That is their strategic deterrence, which is okay as long as they don't have nuclear weapons on board. So I think you're going to see a good faith effort on the part of the United States to negotiate a deal with Iran to bring an end to Iran's nuclear weapons potential. And I think the Iranians are ready for that deal. I think, one of the things that has gone and I know I'm talking to an Iranian, so you know these things, but the Syrian collapse was so sudden because one of the things that we did is we look at the facade of autocratic power in the form of Bashar al-Assad and all the trappings of that. We didn't realize the extent to which the sanctions, the Caesar sanctions and others, had eroded that system. And so in the end, what we were looking at is this gilded cage that was all glitter on the top, but there was nothing left. Everything had rotted out. So when HTS began their offensive, they tapped it and it collapsed. And we're all like, what the hell happened there? Iran in August, September of 2023 underwent a very big crisis. It was a crisis that came out of the tragic death of the Kurdish girl who was arrested on a hijab violation and died in police custody. And legitimate demonstrations rose up throughout Iran. Demonstrations that the Iranian government said, we agree with you. These are legitimate grievances. Where the government didn't seek to violently suppress these things. They were saying, oh, no, we recognize we have to make some changes. This can never happen again. They're not saying that they murdered her, but they were just saying she shouldn't have been arrested to begin with. There was no reason for this. But then outside powers took advantage of these demonstrations, and the United States, the CIA, MI6, every intelligence service that had an interest, the Mossad, Azerbaijanis, everybody, empowered their respective groups, the monarchists, the Arab Avaz movement, MEK, the Kurds, you name it, the Baluch. They said, go, rise up now. Rise up now. Everybody rise up at the same time and make Iran burn, and we're going to bring it down. It was the goal of the CIA to collapse Iran in the fall of 2023. Straight up goal. And it didn't work. But when I spoke to Raisi in September in New York City, he said straight up that this was one of the greatest crises that Iran has faced since the Iran-Iraq war. That Iran, it was an existential moment where Iran was tested by along everything, but it tested especially in terms of society. That if there was going to be a time for the society to reject the theocracy, this was it. And they didn't. They rallied around the Iranian regime. And they survived. But the other lesson that came out of it is the reality that that was not a guaranteed outcome. And the Iranian government recognized that. See, it was a guaranteed outcome. You don't get worried, do you? If you know you're going to win, you're not worried. Raisi said they were worried. There was a period of time where they thought it was the end. That means that there's a vulnerability inside Iran that the West might be ignoring. That's a vulnerability driven by a society that has lost faith with the government. And you see indications of that, for instance, in voter participation. Ayatollah Khomeini, from the very beginning, when the Islamic Republic was created, said one of the key indicators of the success of the Islamic Republic is that the people continue to vote. If they participate in the elections, that alone signifies the belief in the system. And you've seen participation rates drop off. The first round of when Raisi died, they had elections in June. The first round, the participation rates were horrible because the people had lost faith in society. Then something happened. One of the candidates that emerged from the first round was this Pez Nashi, and I think I've just butchered his name again. Yeah, President P. he emerged, and he was portrayed as a moderate, and he campaigned on some very moderate platforms, so moderate that many Iranians that I know view him as a traitor. These are people who condemn Zarif, the former foreign minister, as a traitor for the JCPOA and all this stuff, and they're looking at him saying, no, he's betraying everything. But he won the election. And in the second round, when he ran, the participation levels went up to respectable levels. Not what they used to be, but we're climbing. What does that mean? That the Iranian people will believe in this system if the system delivers reforms. That the Iranian people are not married to the axis of resistance and the role of Iran as, the head of this resistance against everybody in the region. They're more interested in economic, viability, economic reform, economic growth. And I think there's some hesitance on the part of President P in BRICS. BRICS was something that Raisi was spearheading. Raisi and his foreign minister were all about getting Iran to throw in full scale with BRICS. But they both died in this helicopter crash. And the new president and the new foreign minister came in and went, we're not going to walk away from BRICS. We like the opportunities, but we're not going all in. We believe that there's a lot to be gained by having good relations with the West. And they campaigned on that. It's not as though this was a secret. They openly campaigned on this in June, and they won the election. And so now we have a situation where the axis of resistance, not because of that Iran wanted it, but it's faltered because of what happened to Bashar al-Assad. And I think the Iranian president is looking around saying, there before the grace of God goes us. That if we head down a path that leads to military confrontation, where our infrastructure is damaged or destroyed, no matter what the outcome, if our economy is in tatters and we've interrupted our ability to engage with BRICS and we've shut the door on the West, we're going to be the next Bashar al-Assad. And we don't want that to happen. So I think there is, I'm not going to call it panic. I just think there's a level of reality in Tehran today about what needs to happen if Iran is to avoid the fate of Syria. I'm not saying Iran's there yet, but sanctions has an ability to erode a society from within. And you can only ask so much of a population. And when you're approaching the third generation of Iranians that have been promised an economic revival but denied it, you're at the point where these people are 3 generations removed from the revolution. See, revolutionary zeal can get you through a lot. I remember when the good old days in '79 when I was on the streets of Tehran hunting down the MEK. Yay! Yes, I remember when we took that incursion up to Kurdistan and we killed those Kurdish, the rebellion. Then the Iran-Iraq war, hell, it's all the veterans get together and talk about it. Well, the veterans are long in the tooth right now. They're old. And the people that are coming in grew up when Rafsanjani initially said, I'm going to do the economic revival. And he tried to do that, but then he got caught up in the nuclear thing and the sanctions came in and that didn't work. And then I think it was Khatami after him, was it Ahmadinejad? No, I can't. It was Rafsanjani, Ahmadinejad, Khatami, Raisi.
Yeah.
So, but so you have this cycle of reformist, conservative, getting yanked around, and meanwhile, the reformists can't close the deal with the West. The conservatives don't have what it takes to find something viable. Reformers come in, they can't close the deal with the West. And the Iranian people are just fed up, and you can't blame them. And so that first generation, the Rafsanjani, Ahmadinejad people, were still revolutionaries at core. Khatami came in, he was a revolutionary, but now his support base, you saw this in the Green. Remember the Green Revolution or the Green Movement? It's a third generation of Iranians coming in saying, we're not the revolutionaries and we're not the children of the revolutionaries. We're the grandchildren of the revolutionaries, and we don't believe in the revolution anymore. The revolution isn't what drives us. We're looking for something else here. We need something to fill this, and the government's not filling it. And now we're entering into the 4th generation of Iranians, and there's an emptiness in them. And if the government doesn't find a way to fill that emptiness, Iran could very well collapse the way Syria did. So I think this government now is focused on what needs to be done to save the theocracy. Because while it's not quite where Bashar al-Assad was, if something isn't done to reverse the trajectory that they're on, that's probably the inevitable outcome.
Yeah, I think that Iranian people right now, they don't feel to have any sort of revolution, Scott. They don't want any sort of revolution in Iran. They're not happy with the economy of Iran, but at the end of the day, it's so important, the position of Iran in the whole political arena of the world. And we know that we've been talking about Russia and Iran for such a long time. Both of these countries want some sort of agreement, negotiations with the United States, but there is no will on the part of the US government so far. We haven't seen so far.
But we have a new government coming in.
Yeah. That could
it's
bring
a revolutionary government.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I do believe, Scott, at the end of the day, Donald Trump his main focus is on China. And the bigger picture would be China is not in the Middle East, is not in Ukraine. He wants some sort of shift. I'm not talking about military confrontation. I'm talking about an economic confrontation. And that's why I'm bringing this up, because Antony Blinken, in this interview with New York Times, he mentioned the policy of the United States toward China. Here's what he said.
As I said before, in the absence of American diplomacy, you're going to have diplomacy by lots of other countries that are going to shape the world in ways that may not be so friendly to our own interests and our own values. So that's a choice. We can disengage. We can not be present. We can stand back, but we know others will step in, and we have to decide whether that's in our interest.
I mean, it's not that he wants to stand back. It's that he uses other methods to make countries bend to America's will.
Well,
You're seeing some of these actions.
Let's take an example. Let's take a concrete example. Let's talk about China for a minute. I think President Trump was right during his first administration in identifying some of the challenges posed by China. No country has the capacity that China does to reshape to its own will and designs the international system that we and many others put in place after the Second World War. It has the military power, the economic power, the diplomatic power to do that in ways that no other country does. And we also know that many of the practices it's engaged in have been grossly unfair to our workers, to our companies, undercutting them, driving them out of business. So I think he was right in identifying that problem. Where I would disagree with the approach he took, and where I would commend to him the approach that we pursued, is we're so much more effective in dealing with the challenges posed by China when we're working closely with other countries. So if you're trying to take on the China problem, but at the same time you're taking actions that in one way or another alienate allies and partners, you're likely to be less effective in dealing with China. When we took office, the European Union was on the verge of signing a major trade agreement with China. They were hedging. They weren't sure if they could count on the United States. We'd had real challenges in the relationships in the preceding 4 years, and they were hedging toward China. So were many other countries. We were really on the decline when it came dealing with China diplomatically and economically. We've reversed that. And so I think the difference is the way we've approached it is we've sought to bring other countries in to dealing with this challenge. When we're dealing with China's economic practices that we don't like, and we're doing it alone, we're 20% of world GDP. When we've aligned Europeans, key allies and partners in the Asia Pacific, we're suddenly 40, 50, 60% of world GDP, something that China can't ignore. And again, what I've seen over these last 4 years is a convergence in the approach taken to China with Europe and with Asia that we've not seen before. And I know it's succeeding because every time I meet with my Chinese counterpart, Wang Yi, the foreign minister, he inevitably spends 30, 40 minutes, 60 minutes complaining about everything we've done to align other countries, to build this convergence in dealing with things that we don't like that China's pursuing. So to me, that is the proof point that we're much better off through diplomacy.
I mean, you're muted.
Is the United States much better off than it was before? Joe Biden?
Again, this is why I'm telling you, this is a scripted interview. This is such crap. I wish he had tried to pull this with me, because I'd point out a couple things. First of all, Blinken, let's look at the last couple times you went to China. You weren't treated well. You weren't treated. The red carpet didn't come out. You didn't get the meetings. You're treated like the misbehaving schoolboy that you are. You were scolded, and then you were sent on your way. You accomplished nothing. That's the reality of it. He's making it sound as though he came in as Tony Blinken and he sat down in a room and the weak little Chinese foreign minister was complaining about this for 60 minutes. He was complaining. That's not it. Blinken was left waiting for hours, brought in, standing there alone while the Chinese went, "You're an idiot, you're screwed, you're stupid, get out of here. There won't be a joint press conference." That's how he was treated. That's the reality. Let's talk about Europe for a second. Yeah, Europe was hedging because Europe was looking out for its own security interests. What did we do? We blew up Nord Stream pipeline, which made Europe, Germany collapse economically and Europe collapse. But we got it. We encouraged this war in Ukraine. I just want everybody to understand it. Russia didn't start this war. We made this war happen. I already went through that. I don't need to go through it again. We made the Ukraine war happen. And there were different things we were trying to accomplish with it. The strategic defeat of Russia, but also bringing an end to European Union independence, to weaken the European Union. We wanted Europe to go against China. Europe has no desire to. Why? Because they're all invested in Chinese economy. The Germans especially. So what we did is we sanctioned Russia. We got Europe to buy into the sanctioning of Russia. And then as China didn't go along with it, the United States came in and said, You got to stand up to China because you're doing this whole Ukraine thing. China's the problem. You've got to stand up to China. And Europe went, oh, yeah, I guess we got to do it. But we really don't want to. But I guess we got to do it, right? We got to do it. Yeah. And so they do things like the Germans send Schultz and Baerbock and others to China, where they were talking about, I forget what the term they use. You weren't allowed to say that you were de-linking with China. You were de-risking. That was the American term. Oh, no. You're not cutting links with China. You're de-risking. What de-risking means is you're cutting links, but you're doing it so that you reduce the risk you have of being over-leveraged into China, because the United States doesn't want you over-leveraged into China. The United States wants you to de-link from China. But you can't call it that. It's called de-risking. And they went over there, and the Chinese went, no, you're just trying to de-link. Okay, we're good with that. And I think Schultz brought like 30 or 40 business leaders, one of whom was like head of Volkswagen, who tapped old Schultz on the, I should, oops, that's my fault. It's okay, guys, that was just me. I won't do that again. But he tapped Schultz on the shoulder and he said, hey, I got him spun up. It's okay. It was just me. Okay. Sorry. They're very protective of me. So, but they said the only thing that makes Volkswagen profitable in this post-Ukraine conflict world is China. That's it. It's the only place we turn a profit. And we just have to turn enough profit that it makes up for all the losses elsewhere and keeps Volkswagen in the black so we can keep employing people at home. You don't want to de-risk or de-link or do any of this because that'll be the end of Volkswagen. You can't do that. Well, he did. It was the end of Volkswagen. They're done. I mean, they're shutting down factories and everything. That's the reality of it. That's what America wanted. You see, Blinken, again, he said something, Europe was starting together to have a strategic trade relationship with China. Why? Europe would thrive. We didn't want that. We had to bring an end to it. So we created a war that got Europe involved in the war. And the war then could be spun in a way that said, in order for Europe to prevail in the conflict they have in Ukraine, they have to put pressure on China to separate from Russia, which means you have to put economic, and that trade deal is impossible. And Blinken's calling this diplomacy. He's bragging as if this is genius diplomacy. It's not diplomacy, it's lunacy. It's insanity. And the sad thing is that Europe went along with it. But is Blinken really going to write a book about how we screwed Europe? The Lessons in American Diplomacy 101. I can see him teaching his class now, whatever university takes him at Harvard, Yes, I'm going to teach in Diplomacy 101 today. We're going to discuss the genius of American foreign policy as we intervene diplomatically to get Europe to wean itself off of its overdependence upon China. That sounds good. What happened to Europe? Oh, they collapsed and died, and the European Union went away, and it just, total screw it for everybody. What happened to China? Oh, they emerged stronger and more expansive. And this is a diplomatic victory. See, there's no diplomatic victory. The Biden administration has been horrible across the board on China. There's not a single place where they've actually won. They've lost everywhere. Trump is going to come in, and he's going to hopefully change things. And I'm not talking about winning against China, but I'm talking about, because first of all, Biden administration has brought us dangerously close to a nuclear war with China. That's the other thing that Blinken didn't want to talk about that I would have loved to ask about. I'd ask about the nuclear employment strategy of the Biden administration that was just promulgated. How did this happen, Tony? You're Secretary of State. Why is it that when you came in, we weren't in danger of a nuclear war with China, and as we leave, we are? What happened, Tony? Could it be that your policies suck? Could it be that your policies, because you can't compete with China economically, that you over-leveraged America's military power and pushed China into a corner where they had to respond by expanding a strategic nuclear deterrence force that they never wanted to expand? China never intended to go beyond the 400 warheads that they had on old aging missiles. Now they're putting 1,000 silos in the ground with 300 missiles shuttled between them, DF-41s, solid fuel, multiple independent targeted reentry vehicles. We're screwed. So screwed we had to redo our entire nuclear war strategy. Is that diplomatic success? Are you going to teach that in Diplomacy 201 in Harvard? How to turn China into a viable nuclear force without thinking? Nothing the Biden administration did against China was successful. We've lost everywhere. Go to Peru. I mean, here's the thing about Peru. Let's talk about railroads. The Chinese come in and build a damn port, $1 billion port. And they're now testing it. They're bringing in giant container ships. And to get these stuff out of there, China's working on railroads extensions so that, containers can land, offload, boom. And China now is starting to control the supply chain in South. So how do we respond? I think we went to California, maybe Sacramento, I don't know, city. And we bought trains that were built in the 1980s. And we sold them to the Peruvians so they could modernize their domestic, transportation system. That's how we compete with China, ladies and gentlemen. That is, and when Biden recently traveled, I think, to Peru as part of this the summit that was there. Blinken and Biden are selling this. This is the greatest thing since sliced bread. This is American. We are so damn good that we brought you 50-year-old railroad technology that doesn't work anymore. We already cashiered it, but we're going to bring it to you, make you pay for it as part of American aid package so you can install it in Lima so that your citizens can now get on board. Non-functioning trains are going to break down in a year and there's no spare parts. Meanwhile, China's built the biggest damn port in South America, and they are controlling everything, not through military dominance. It's because they're better at it than we are. Donald Trump's mad about China about the Panama Canal. There's no military power in the Panama Canal. It's just China manages the canal very effectively, makes money for everybody involved. And we can't handle that, not in our own backyard. So we're going to take that over. And by the time this is done, we're going to own that port in Peru. Watch. I guarantee that's going to happen. We're going to turn South America into an American colony. That's the reality. It's not a good thing. I'm not saying it's a good thing, but China can't push back militarily. They don't have the military to do that. And so what you're going to see is as Trump seeks to evict China, China's going to consolidate power. I believe Trump's going to give up on the South China Sea. We're not going to be challenging him on that. And the world already sees that. You do know that Indonesia, I believe, just became a BRICS member, full-scale, straight-up BRICS member. Indonesia. Okay, that's the end of the G20. The G20 is finished. Indonesia is now BRICS. You know who else is? Thailand going to be.
Malaysia.
You know who else? Malaysia. Guess who just lost Asia? Tony Blinken. That little nodding jerk who sat there and pretended that he's some sort of master diplomat who schooled the Chinese. The Chinese just schooled the living crap out of him. Indonesia, we lost Indonesia. We lost Malaysia. We lost Thailand. And you think the Philippines are sitting there going, holy damn, did we just sign a bunch of treaties with America and they just ran away and we're joining BRICS too. Watch how quick the Philippines dumps us and jumps to BRICS. They have no choice. That stupid little St. Thomas Shoal or whatever, where they have a sunken ship with a bunch of Marines on it, they're going to forget about that in a heartbeat. They'll sign a deal with the Chinese that let Filipino fishermen go in there, but that's going to become part of China. Guaranteed. We're giving up on that. Why? Because we can't fight China everywhere. We don't want to fight China everywhere. That is a failed fight. Our job now is to secure Fortress America. And that's what Trump's going to do. He's going to secure Fortress America, and the Chinese are going to consolidate. And then what we have is a giant game of Risk. You know, at the end of the game of Risk, after all the little countries get eaten up, and you got like 3 players, you know, and you're like, what do we do? You know, and eventually you don't do anything because it's not worth it. Because to fight this guy exposes you for this guy to come in, and we're going to try and split the Russians up from the Chinese. We're going to do our best to do that. We're going to reinvent Europe. The European Union was a failure. So I think we're going to reinvent Europe along the old traditional lines where we're going to deal with individual nation states as opposed to a singularity. NATO is finished, so we don't have to worry about NATO anymore. Because that was just Europe is so fundamentally broken in terms of its capacity to defend itself. In order to turn that around, America would have to pour in trillions of dollars over the course of decades, and we don't want to do that. Nobody should want to do that. If we had elected Kamala Harris, we'd have gone down that path, but we'd all die in a nuclear war anyway. So right now, Donald Trump is a revolutionary. He's revolutionary change in the world today. Can he pull it off? I don't know. Should he be allowed to pull it off? I don't know. But I can tell you he's going to damn well try.
Thank you so much, Scott, for being with us today. Great pleasure as always.
Was this uplifting? I don't know. We'll see what happens. I mean, it's, that old, again, I keep saying it's an old Chinese curse, and then I'm told that people don't think it was a real Chinese curse, but I'm going to say it anyway. The old Chinese curse, may you live in interesting times.
Yeah.
We live in interesting times, and it's the times that give relevance to podcasts like yours. I mean, could you imagine people tuning in if everything was hunky-dory and the world was boring? What would dialogue works? Well, there ain't much to talk about today. Joe Smith went out and caught a yellowfin tuna because the yellowfin are making a comeback in the Caribbean. And people be like, nah, we're going to tune out. But we get to talk about really interesting geopolitical things because the world's going to hell in a handbasket. And it makes the world interesting. Tragically so, because again, we can laugh about these things, but there are, hundreds of millions of human lives, billions of human lives at stake here. If decisions are made poorly and all that. So, and I think that's why people tune in, because there is so much at stake. So here's to job security for at least another couple years.
Yeah. Thank you so much. See you next week, Scott.
Okay. Have a good one.
Bye-bye.
Bye.